This is Suriname, one of the smallest countries in South America. 94% of its land is buried under rainforests, leaving just a narrow strip of space for most of the population to live. At the same time, Suriname is also the only independent country in the Americas that speaks Dutch. It is a rare trace left over from a colonial past that shaped the country in a way nowhere else has ever seen. Coming to Suriname, you will feel like the whole world is squeezed into one tiny country. African, Indian, Indonesian, indigenous, Chinese, and European communities all live together. Just on one street, you can come across a mosque, a Hindu temple, a Catholic church, and even a synagogue all standing together. No single community completely takes over. Diversity in Suriname isn't just about numbers. It shows up in every neighborhood, every prayer, and the rhythm of everyday life. But behind that diversity is a big question. How have they managed to live when almost their entire homeland still belongs to the forest? Suriname is one of the greenest places on the planet. Rainforests cover nearly the entire territory, stretching from the swamps along the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the inland border with Brazil. Beneath the thick tree canopy is a world that is always damp and shady, where sunlight only hits the ground through small gaps in the old woods. Cutting right through that green mass are wide rivers, winding through the untouched forest before dumping into the ocean. They split the country up, but at the same time, they feed massive ecosystems. The further south you go, the higher the land gets, opening up to rocky hills, waterfalls, and ancient forests belonging to the Guiana Shield, one of the oldest geological regions on Earth. Up north, nature flips completely. Mangroves, mudflats, and swamps stretch along the coast, forming a natural shield against the ocean waves. This is where flocks of migrating birds stop after a long trip. The lives of Surinamese folks are also packed into a very small part right here. On the low plains along the Atlantic, cities, farm fields, and neighborhoods line up one after another among a thick network of canals. Mornings in Paramaribo start in the heat and humidity that cover the city super early. After a night of rain, water still puddles on the streets. Near the banks of the Suriname River, the central market has been awake for a long time. Fish, green veggies, tropical fruits, meat, spices, and bundles of leaves used for cooking or medicine quickly fill up the stands. Some of the goods come from gardens right outside town. The rest are brought down the river from communities tucked deep inland. Because of that, the market is way more than just a place to buy and sell. It is the meeting point between Suriname's two worlds. Produce from the coast sits next to river fish and forest goods. Hindustani spices, Javanese ingredients, and food from Maroon communities all show up in one spot, proving how much history has blended right into everyday life. Leaving the market and heading toward the old streets near Waterkant, the colonial past is still alive in the white wooden houses. Symmetrical fronts, tall windows, and pitched roofs show signs of Dutch architecture, but they were tweaked to fit the tropical weather. These buildings stand under rows of trees, right by streets that once connected the harbor to the plantation system that shaped Suriname for centuries. That mix is also super clear in religious life. On Keizerstraat, the Nave Shalom synagogue stands right next to a mosque. Not far from there are Catholic churches and Hindu temples. Within just a few blocks, a bunch of communities pray in completely different ways. But religion in Paramaribo doesn't just stay behind the doors of places of worship. It follows people into their meals, outfits, weddings, funerals, and the holidays that shift the vibe of the whole neighborhood. Kids grow up surrounded by different rituals, different languages, and different ways of looking at the world. But Paramaribo is just one side of Suriname. Leaving the coastal markets, wooden houses, and churches behind, the roads slowly thin out. The city fades out of view. The forest gets closer until the river starts taking over for familiar roads and pulls people into a totally different pace of life. In the Samaka villages along the upper Suriname River, life flows at a slower beat that feels much closer to nature. Mornings kick off under palm leaves, with cassava flour spread evenly on a hot pan to make food for the whole family. Kids play board games on the porch, kick a soccer ball in an open dirt patch, or help the adults push wheelbarrows down the trails. Further out on the river, longboats cross rocky rapids together, hauling people and goods from one village to another. Out here, work, play, and family aren't split apart. Everything happens right between the homes, the forest, and the river that has kept the community alive for generations. But that river doesn't just carry food, goods, or people. It also holds the memory of the escape that made the Sayamaka people who they are. Their ancestors once took off from colonial plantations, headed deep into the woods, and built their own free communities. Every year, that memory comes back to life during Samakadaka, a day remembering the 1762 peace treaty, when the Dutch government had to recognize the freedom of the Samaka. Through drumbeats, dances, and rituals offering rum to the ancestors, generations get together to retell the journey that brought them to this land. To really get the people in Suriname, you just need to walk into the Paramaribo Central Market right as the morning starts. In the middle of aisles packed with veggies, river fish, and spices, a Hindustani family sets out produce from the coast. Nearby, a Javanese pot of sayoto soup is steaming, while Maroon women bring in crops from their inland villages to the city. Every single stand holds a piece of history. Indigenous groups have lived on this land since before colonial times. African folks were once brought to plantations, and some ran off into the forest and built free Maroon communities. After slavery ended, workers from India and Java kept coming to Suriname. Along with the Creole, the Chinese, and mixed generations, they make up the country today. In the market, Dutch kicks off a sale, and then Shranan Tongo quickly links up people from different backgrounds. Behind the doors of each house, family languages are still kept alive. Surinamese people don't share the same ancestors, but over many generations, they have learned how to live side by side on this small strip of land tucked between the Atlantic Ocean and a giant forest. And for most of them, that life starts right on the busy streets of Paramaribo. Suriname is made up of communities from a bunch of different parts of the world. The Hindustani brought Indian flavors. The Javanese kept their Southeast Asian seasoning style. The Creole, Maroon, Chinese, and indigenous people keep putting their own ingredients, memories, and cooking styles on the table. Over generations, everything meets up in the small kitchens of Paramaribo, making the food here one of the clearest pictures of the country's diversity. As evening rolls in, the smell of food starts drifting through the markets and roadside food stalls. Roti gets torn by hand, eaten with curry, potatoes, and meat. Hot saoto soup steams up, smelling like chicken, eggs, and Javanese spices. Nasi and bami are tossed quickly in a wok, while golden-baked pom and moxie alisi show up at big Creole family dinners. But over in Suriname, dishes rarely belong only to the community that brought them over anymore. A Javanese person might grab roti for lunch. A Hindustani family buys saoto to take home. In a Creole kitchen, nasi is still served right next to a regular fish dish. The deeper you go inland, the closer the meals get to the river and the forest. You get fish freshly pulled from the water, cassava mashed and baked, and plantains boiled or fried up for dinner. Every dish holds on to a piece of history, and when they all show up on the same table, Suriname is no longer just a bunch of separate communities. It turns into a country connected by the very flavors its people have learned to share with one another. In Suriname, making a living changes depending on the area. In Paramaribo, the workday starts in schools, hospitals, shops, construction sites, and street food stands. But one job is rarely enough. A lot of families have to sell extra food, set up a stand right in front of their house, or take on odd jobs just to pay the bills. Deep inland, folks grow cassava, plantains, catch fish, and move stuff by boat. Those jobs might put enough food on the table to feed a family, but they aren't enough to buy medicine when someone gets sick or pay for the kids' schooling. Because of that, gold becomes a super tempting promise. It can bring in fast cash, but it also drags workers far from home, cuts roads into the forest, and pushes pollution into the rivers. In an economy that relies a ton on natural resources, money is still being made, but it doesn't always flow to the families who need it most. Over 70% of Suriname's population lives below the poverty line because the economy leans way too hard on mining, while the money coming from resources doesn't create enough jobs and isn't spread out fairly. When bauxite dropped off, inflation went up, and the currency lost its value. The cost of living quickly went way out of reach for a ton of families. Over in Paramaribo, the problem is usually too much water. The city sits on low and pretty much flat land. When heavy rains drag on, the ditches fill up fast. Water spills over the roads, puddles in front of houses, and creeps into neighborhoods built lower than street level. A normal drive to work can get blocked by a flooded street. Kids have to wade through water to get to school, and a lot of families spend hours sweeping water out of their yards. Over generations, people have learned how to live with the low land. Houses get built on raised foundations. Ditches get dug around neighborhoods. Stuff gets lifted higher every time dark clouds roll in. But as rainstorms get harder to predict and sea levels keep putting pressure on the coast, those old ways of adapting are being put to the test more and more. Deep inland, the struggle comes from having too little water. When a drought drags out, the rivers shrink and boats can't carry full loads. Gas has to be split up into a bunch of smaller trips. Food takes way longer to reach the villages. Prices go up with every single hour an engine has to run through shallow waters. A sick person needing to get to a clinic might have to wait for the water levels to change. A teacher can't make it to school on time. Gardens dry up, while drinking water takes a hit too. Communities living right in the middle of one of the largest wet forests in the world can still run short on the exact water that keeps them connected to the rest of the country. That is one of the deepest contrasts in Suriname. The most crowded spot can get drowned by rain. Meanwhile, villages sitting in the middle of the forest can get cut off because the river just isn't deep enough anymore. These struggles mean the country needs to grow. People need better roads, more stable schools, electricity, clean water, and jobs that bring in a steady paycheck. But the road to a better life usually leads straight into the forest. That is the place holding gold, timber, and a ton of resources that can bring in cash for the country. Over at the Central Suriname Nature Reserve, the forest still stretches almost completely untouched across mountains, rivers, and valleys with barely any human footprints. It protects the water supply, stores a massive amount of carbon, and keeps ecosystems running that have been around for thousands of years. But the forest's value isn't just in things you can measure with science. To the Maroon and indigenous communities, the forest is where they get their food, medicinal plants, and building materials for their homes. It is family territory, where their ancestors once lived, with trails they have memorized and stories passed down from the older folks to the little ones. A bend in the river, a garden, or a patch of forest isn't just a piece of dirt on a map. It can hold the memories of a whole community. But that very same forest is being looked at in a bunch of different ways. To a mining company, it's timber or minerals. To the government, it could be a source of cash and jobs. To the outside world, it's a carbon vault that needs to be protected. As for the people actually living inside it, it's simply home. When new roads get paved, mining sites and heavy machines push deeper too. The river might change color. Fish get harder to find. Lands that have been used for generations get slapped over with mining rights decided from somewhere super far away. The clash isn't just between conservation and development. It also lies in the question of who actually has the right to call the shots on the forest's fate. Suriname can't just lock up the forest and expect folks to keep living with the same old hardships. Conserving without creating ways to make a living is going to be tough to keep up long-term. But developing by just taking everything you can sell will also wreck the very foundation that so many communities lean on. The future of the country, therefore, sits right between two needs that can't be ignored. City folks need steady jobs, better infrastructure, and neighborhoods that can actually handle flooding. Inland people need electricity, clean water, schools, healthcare, and solid transportation. The country needs investment and income to close the gap between those two worlds. Gold, timber, and oil can bring in cash really fast, but money only means something when it gets turned into schools, hospitals, roads, and chances for the people living right on that land. If resources leave the forest while the community still lacks clean water, that kind of growth is only going to make the old gap even deeper. Local folks also have to be included in decisions having to do with their land, rivers, and forests. Because nobody gets how a water current shifts, what seasons a garden depends on, or what memories a forest holds, better than the people who have lived there for generations. Can a country get richer without destroying the world that has kept it green? Suriname still doesn't have a total answer. But for most of the people, that isn't some far-away debate. It decides whether their kids will have jobs, whether the river will still have fish, and whether their village will even survive in the next couple of decades. For a lot of young Surinamese folks, growing up usually comes with a tough question. Do they stay where their family has lived for generations, or leave to look for a bigger future? In Paramaribo, kids grow up close to schools, the internet, and opportunities that are easier to reach than in the rest of the country. But once they get out of class, they step into a tiny job market. Not every field has enough room for young people, and not every dream can be chased down within the borders of a country that only has a little over 500,000 people. Because of that, the Netherlands has long been a regular go-to spot. A shared language, a colonial history, and relatives who already made the move make the trip across the Atlantic feel a lot closer. The wave of migration shot up big time in 1975 when Suriname got its independence, and then kept going during the messy times in the 1980s. Over in the Netherlands, people with Surinamese roots make up about 2% of the population, coming out to roughly 370,000 people. That is basically half of Suriname's entire current population. Surinamese folks in the Netherlands bring a ton to the economy and culture of that country. The most standout thing is them showing up on European soccer fields. Ruud Gullit and Frank Rijkaard belong to a generation of players with Surinamese roots who rose up wearing the Dutch jersey. Edgar Davids, Clarence Seedorf, and Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank were born in Suriname and then moved to the Netherlands when they were young. Coming up after them are Patrick Kluivert, Jorginho Wijnaldum, and Virgil van Dijk, generations born in the Netherlands who still carry their Suriname's roots from their families. Those names tell part of the journey of Surinamese people, leaving their hometown, starting over in a different country, and finding chances that the place they were born couldn't give them yet. But leaving doesn't mean cutting ties. Their hometown still follows them in their family language, in the food, in their trips back, and in the pride they feel when the name Suriname gets brought up somewhere far away. Even so, not everyone chooses to leave. Plenty of folks still stay back in Paramaribo, Culinary, or the villages tucked deep inland. It isn't because life over here is easier. They still have to deal with shaky jobs, hiking prices, flooded streets after it rains, and trips that drag on for hours down the river. But Suriname holds them back with things you just can't pack into a bag. It is the front porch where generations sit together as the day fades out. It is relatives showing up before even being asked whenever a family hits a rough patch. It is a neighborhood where neighbors know the sound of each other's footsteps. Out in the inland villages, it is also the feeling of a whole community waiting together when a boat comes back, late around the river bend. The dirt also holds on to memories. On the fields of Culinary, a family might have been growing rice for generations. Every canal, dirt bank, and harvest season is tied to the hard work of parents and grandparents. Along the upper Suriname River, a boat landing could be the exact spot where ancestors once set up a village. A stretch of the river might be tied to a kid's very first fishing trip. Knowing about the currents, medicinal plants, and farming seasons gets passed down, not through books, but through days spent living side by side. For the ones who stay, their hometown is more than just where they are living. It is a family network that holds them up. It is a piece of land carrying their ancestors' footprints, and it is a way of living you can only fully get if you grew up right here. Surinamese folks still want better jobs, better schools, and a more steady life. Some will leave, some will stay. Others might go to school and work for years in the Netherlands, only to come back one day. Between those two choices, neither path is totally easy. Leaving can open up a future, but it also creates distance from family. Staying keeps folks close to their homeland, but sometimes forces them to settle for fewer chances. Because of that, what Surinamese people are looking for isn't just a richer place. They want to move forward without losing the chunk of life that made them who they are. Whether they live by the rivers deep in the forest or right in the middle of Dutch cities, a lot of people still carry that same string. A memory of a tiny homeland where family, dirt, and community are always waiting for them to come back. Surinamese people don't all live the exact same way. The bulk of the population groups up on the coastal strip, in cities and low-lying neighborhoods right up against the Atlantic. They work in services, trade, administration, and farming. Another group lives deep inland, in villages sitting along the rivers. They lean on boats, gardens, fishing, community, and knowing the forest. Between those two worlds, goods, people, money, and hope are constantly moving. The forest is what pushes the population together along the coast. It turns the river into a roadway. It gives food, jobs, and resources. But it also puts Suriname in front of some tough choices between growing and conserving. Suriname isn't just a forest with a few cities stuck inside it. It is a country where folks have learned how to live on the edge of the woods, along the rivers, and right in the middle of many different worlds. And in the greenest nation in South America, the future of the people is still tightly glued to the fate of every single forest.